keynote speech is prepared by the Emeritus Professor Diego de Reo of Griffith University. To briefly introduce his history, Professor Diego de Reo is an Emeritus Professor in Psychiatry at Griffith University in Brisbane, and he served as the President of International Association for Suicide Prevention and is a co-founder and past President of the International Academy for Suicide Research and is also a co-founder of the Journal Archives of Suicide Research. In 2003, Professor de Reo initiated the World Day for Prevention of Suicide to be on September 10th. Overall, he is a world-class scholar with about more than 500 peer-reviewed articles. Having said that, let us now watch his keynote speech through the video.
A very good morning to everyone, and I'm very thankful for having been invited to this important ASEM forum. My talk will be on things that we need to fight in the perspective of having the best possible well-being for older adults. I'm going to share the screen now with a series of slides, commencing with what exactly we should fight to achieve something. The first monster we need to adapt, to counteract at least, is this form of bigotry called ageism. Ageism is due probably to Robert Butler, and is the prejudice based on the age group from another age group, and something that was born in the United States, which is a society traditionally oriented towards activity, pragmatism, beauty, and what about older adults? Older adults seen as less useful to society. Ageism, anyway, is not a phenomenon bound only to the United States, but is widespread. There was a very recent report from WHO called Global Report on Ageism, delivered March 21, so last year. This is the cover page of this report. And this report highlights that ageism is a phenomenon that starts early in the life of individuals. During childhood, we are learning to pick up elements around individuals that represent stereotypes and prejudices. And this stereotype version of reality are soon internalized. And they represent the future guidance of individuals. And unfortunately, this orientates also the judgment towards individuals of different ages. It's worth remembering that ageism is not only towards late life individuals, but also against young individuals. And there are different forms of discrimination and stereotype version towards, for example, sexual minorities, towards disabled individuals, towards different races, toward people with mental disabilities. Southeast Asia, in the global report on ageism, has been seen as one of the countries, one of the areas with the most expressed, most present attitudes in characterizing ageistic forms. And ageism is not just a cultural phenomenon, it's something that has consequences. And these consequences are on the well-being of the individuals, their health, their mental and physical health, their human rights. ageism has been seen associated with a shorter lifespan and with a slower recovery from disability and clinical decline. It affects quality of life of individuals, increases social isolation and loneliness. And those conditions are both associated with serious health problems and suicidal behavior. We would say it in a short while, but also has financial, economic consequences, providing insecurity, particularly in older age. So the cost of ageism, it's really very important. We can imagine different forms of ageism. We have seen through the COVID how much the ageistic views have informed, unfortunately, health practices and decision. There are therapies that are rationed on the basis of the age of the individuals or mandatory retirement ages. There are forms not only of institutional ageism, but also interpersonal ageism, which may be expressed by patronizing or disrespecting older adults, avoiding contacts and interactions, speaking in a peculiar way, which is known as elder speaking. So a type of use of language that infantilizes older adults and figure them as incompetent and incapable and treat them at the end impolitely, or considering individuals that they are worthless based on their age. But there is also a self-directed form of ageism, which is the one that impeds individuals to gain skills, new skills in later life, or make them avoiding to enroll in courses, every sort of new hobby or new activity. So ageism is something that we need to fight with extreme vigor. I was mentioning what happened with the COVID and the decision made on ageistic stereotypes. We have seen them particularly in retirement home or in nursing homes for older adults, where, for example, the scarcity of resources available, particularly ventilators or access to intensive care unit, were allocated according to chronological age of individuals. And this has been terrible. But summing up, so the impacts of ageism are several. We have seen at the health, physical and mental health, but also at the economic level. The economic level may mean poverty or economic burden on society. At the mental health level means mental disorder, cognitive impairment. At physical health level may be represented by reduced longevity, physical illness, risky health behavior, inappropriate medication use, or even sexually transmitted diseases. If we try to understand when these ageistic views were formed first, there is a study quite recent based on the corpus of historical American English, which established that approximately 200 years ago, with the medicalization of aging and the growth of the segment of the population above 65 years of age, there was the appearing of form of ageistic understanding and interpretation of society. These ageistic views are also reflected clearly on the language we use, and important associations such as the American Psychiatric Association, Every Mind Older, Health Partners have all pushed towards the adoptions of terminologies able to counteract discrimination of persons with mental health conditions or physical disabilities. Because this person, through the use of that language, are frequently marginalized. An example, we shouldn't use the term elderly, but change it in older person or older people. We also should avoid the use of the word senior or seniors. And again, older people. Senior citizens equally, it's discriminatory. But also geriatric and geriatrics should be limited to medical environment and don't use them in the common language. And also common forms of idiomatic language, such as being the silver tsunami, the aging tsunami, the great wave, or being over the hill, the demographic cliff, are all terminologies that represent discriminatory views and should be avoided as much as possible. The fight against ageism has been also sentenced by Antonio Guterres, which is the present Secretary General of the United Nations, and is a mission of important associations such as the World Psychiatric Association and the International Psychogeriatric Association. So it's something we need to be able doing in the coming years with much more vigor than what we have done so far. One of the consequences of ageistic stereotyped views is, for example, expressed here by a rather frequently quoted sentence from a Spanish poet, José Bergamin, who is famous to have reported and maintained that at 60, we can commit suicide, and committing itself is a wording that needs to be avoided. At 70, it is advisable, and at 80, obligatory. So this is a powerful ageistic terminology. I was mentioning loneliness and depression. Even the consideration of depression should be considered through the light of ageistic views, because if we consider, for example, that depression is normal with the aging process, and that suicidal behavior can be the result of a rational decision due to accumulation of physical illnesses, frailty, dependency on others, or loneliness or loss of a partner, we are running the risk to include these behaviors under a very ageistic views. And again, the other risk is that we oversimplify the concept of difficulties and critical moments in life where everything becomes attributable to depressive pictures, to depression. And this may involve a rigid prescriptive approach where we limit ourselves as physicians just to the indication of an antidepressant drug. So we rapidly eliminate, conjugate our patients, and we label them as depressed, neglecting the multifactorial nature of the crisis and the attention that should be paid by necessity to all patients, to all individuals, in order to have some chance of counteracting the complexity of a very dangerous suicide progression. But the other enemy we need to fight, apart from the extreme consequences described briefly towards suicide, is loneliness. This is a series of important statements from main media. This is the academic media, the conversation, loneliness could kill you. This has been Surgeon General in the United States stating loneliness kills. This is the front page of the Economist. Loneliness in its way to becoming Britain's most lethal condition. And this is the title from a Canadian Journal of Family Physicians, Social Isolation and Loneliness, the New Geriatric Giants. Social isolation is not the same than loneliness. Social isolation involves the concept of physical isolation. Loneliness involves instead the qualitative judgment. You can be surrounded by many people but feel lonely. And this means that every time that we refer to loneliness, we need to have in mind quite a view that has been beautifully expressed by John Cacioppo when he was in life, that loneliness is a qualitative flavor, something that make feeling people ununderstood by others, and not to have significant relationship with anyone. And this condition is particularly frequent among older adults, as this is testified, for example, in Europe. You can see the scores of questionnaires, the UCLA questionnaire that were involved in this study, demonstrating how much is different the score for older adults compared to younger generation. And loneliness kills, meaning that is a risk factor for many physical health problems, including dementia and cardiovascular diseases. It has been compared to obesity and smoking chronically at least 15 cigarettes a day for all life. This is the American government checking on its population and showing that more than 40% of older adults feel lonely on a regular basis, and that in those lonely individuals, 45% have an increased risk of mortality. And this is even prior to this data from the United States. This is the now famous report from Co-op and Red Cross in UK, showing that more than 9 million inhabitants of Great Britain feel lonely most of the time, if not always. And that 1 in 3 individuals aged 75 and over say that feeling of loneliness are out of their control. The only company is open just television. UK reacted by appointing a minister, and more recently also Japan appointed a minister. I'm aware that Australia and other countries are now trying to do the same, so considering loneliness as a major problem and trying to identify resources and administration able to organize or harmonize efforts to counteract loneliness. But why is so important? For example, I'm quoting 2 studies, 2 very long longitudinal studies. This is probably the most famous of all longitudinal studies, the Grant study, which show among the recruited sample even a young John Fitzgerald Kennedy, then later president of the United States. And the results of the study, often reported by Professor Vaillant, say that love and friendship are more important for the life of an individual than their cholesterol levels. So the strong relationship is the strongest predictor of life satisfaction. So well-being passes through having good connection and not feeling lonely, not being alone, and is a better predictor of long and happy life than any type of social class or wealth or fame, IQ, and genes. So important correlates of this study, which were paralleled by many other studies, but another famous study is the 90-plus study. So more than octogenarian individuals joined this also long longitudinal studies, which showed that people, the super-agers, people living long life and long and satisfying life benefited from high-quality relationships. And these high-quality relationships permitted them also some lightly vicious behavior, like having some cup of alcohol, or even smoking a few cigarettes. But this was probably counteracted by the benefit of doing these things socially, and so sharing with other individuals their glass of wine. Another concept that is probably beautifully represented here by an Italian artist, Maurizio Catalan, is that our sense of the time today, it's something that needs to consider probably in a different life if we want to have a better life. Time today is a clock time. It's good to measure age as the time since birth, but doesn't explain age as an indicator of the aging process. And this typical individualistic, instrumentalist culture of this society, of the current society, has difficulties in relating the healthy but inevitable limitation of the finite life. And of course, there are approaches in biogerontology that indulge in perspective of infinite human life. And mass media profits from this message and try to echo it in many different ways. But finitude in this way is postponed and reserved to those that are really old, which is not the case. And so age becomes a process of living that are beyond our control, but we forget that life has a limit, and the current culture tends to neglect this limit and make individuals unprepared to this type of limitation. And so this is accompanied by unpreparation, disappointment, and difficulty in the individuals. At the end of my speech, then, I can summarize, pinpointing at the need for a good terminology and a good attitude to promote more age-friendly environments, because these are important, for example, in fighting ageistic perspectives. However, we need to be realistic, and we need to be respectful of culture and the variation of meanings through the different situations in the world. We also need to be realistic in obtaining changes in attitudes. We need to remember that traditions, local cultures have inspired attitudes and behavior in individuals, and most probably we need generational changes before obtaining significant modification. At the end, if we really wanted to change how we think, feel, and speak about older adults for the better, we need to be prepared really for a long-haul trip. Thank you for your attention.
Yes, thank you very much, Professor Emeritus Diego Dreo, for the keynote speech once again. Well, it would have been better if we were able to invite you in person, but the COVID-19 situation did not allow us to do so. So maybe next year we'll be able to see him on site here in Seoul.